Welcome on in, golf fans. It's your boy Gsluke here with our course breakdown for this week's BMW Championship. Gonna go over what you need to know about Olympia Fields Country Club, which is truly a major championship type of test. We've seen it for US Opens, PGA Championships in the past, and reminds me a lot of what you had at Oak Hill or even a Winged Foot back in 2020 that had some of the harder leaderboards and harder to come by scoring conditions we've seen over the last 5 to 10 years. In fact, the last time we saw Olympia Fields was back in 2020 when the scoring average was nearly 2 strokes over par, the hardest non-major venue over the last decade. So it's a big boy ballpark. Of course, the second leg of the FedEx Cup playoffs, so you know it's going to be one of the strongest pound for pound fields in all of professional golf. So looking forward to it. And in this video, like I said, going to break down everything you need to know for your research process this week to go out there and have yourself a week for DFS or over there for the prop side. So a lot to get into, especially with a track that we don't see every single year. Let's go ahead and get it started with some of the details about Olympia Fields. Olympia Fields is a relatively long par 70. It's up there near Chicago, so similar agronomy to what you had at Oak Hill. And for some of the events over the last, I'd say month, maybe month and a half of the PGA Tour schedule, you've got bent POA greens, bluegrass rough out there, and green complexes that have a lot of slope to them. The real difficulty at Olympia Fields comes with that bluegrass rough that is 4 inches plus. So at the shorter end, about 4 inches, at the longer end, 5.5, even 6 inches long at spots. If you're watching the Live Bedminster event, they had 5.5, 6 inch rough there. It is going to look very similar with frankly, similar type of grass type up at that part of the country as well. A few other things to note: small green complexes that are extremely tricky. They're odd-shaped greens, not really all that easy to get up and down on, but even if you hit the ball to 15 to 20 feet, you sometimes have 4 or 5, sometimes even 10 to 20-foot breaks to play. I mean, the Jon Rahm putt in the playoff is one that probably comes to mind with this golf course. If you guys were watching golf back there in 2020, he had to literally aim 90 degrees away from the hole to make a putt over there in the playoff, and that's the exact kind of golf course that this is. It's similar to an Augusta National in that way, a Memorial Park golf club, in that the green complexes are just as much of a defense here as the actual ball striking test. So with that long rough, you see a little bit of an emphasis on distance over accuracy. You definitely saw that back there in 2020. The driving accuracy percentage, just to give you an idea, was lower than 50%. It was only 48.1%. A lot of that was because of how firm and fast the golf course played. So your winning score was -4. Like I said, Jon Rahm won in a playoff over Dustin Johnson, and the scoring average for all 4 days was well over par. Part of that was because of how firm it was. It was hard to even hit the fairways out there, but also how firm the greens were, right? The green regulation percentage was just 57.8%. But we might be in for a slightly different test this time. It was super firm. It was super dry out there at Olympia Fields. This time around, it's not only going to rain here on Monday, there's a chance of rain both on Tuesday and Wednesday heading into lock. If any of those storms come through, if 2 or even all 3 of those storms end up hitting this golf course, we could be looking at a soft version of Olympia Fields, which would still play difficult. Don't get me wrong. This wouldn't go from a course that played 1.82 over par back there in 2020 to something that would play under par here, but greens would be a little bit easier to hold, right? Especially out of the rough where you're getting no spin. The fairways, you'd have a much higher fairway percentage with them not rolling out as much and into the rough. And furthermore, right, you'd have a longer golf course. And I think that's what kind of counteracts, right, the easier to hit fairways and greens, is that the course might play an extra 300 to 400 yards. The rough would be even more gnarly. It'd put an even larger emphasis on hitting the short stuff. So we're really going to have to keep an eye on this weather situation, right? If it's firm and fast, it'll probably play pretty similar to last time, right? Where it played like an Oak Hill, it played just like a Winged Foot, super difficult, all about the bomb and gouge. If it plays a little bit softer this time, I'm looking a little bit more iron play, right? Throwing darts is going to be extremely important if it's going to be a little bit more receptive, and also driving distance even more. If it's going to play nearly 7,700 yards with 0 rollout on the fairways, this golf course is going to be be even more driving distance dependent than what we saw there in 2020. And just to give you an idea, right, let's go over the leaderboard there in 2020. Rom, Balmer, DJ, one of the longest players in the world. Hideki, right, at least relatively long, right, maybe not an elite level bomber. Joaquin Niemann hits it a country mile. Tony Finau, enough said. Jason Kokrak, enough said. Guy hits the ball country mile. Matty Fitz, right, maybe a little bit more accurate. Brendan Todd, maybe a little bit more accurate, right? So the thing we've noticed is you're either a bomber here, you hit it a whole long way, or you hit a bunch of fairways, right? There's no real in between. Sebastian Munoz, bomber, hits it a country mile. Mackenzie Hughes hits a bunch of fairways. Lanto Griffin hits a bunch of fairways. Rory McIlroy bombs it. Ryan Harmon hits a bunch of fairways. The issue here in 2023 is that if it's going to play long, right, super receptive, those fairway players, I don't think are going to get it done this time, right? They're not going to get that extra rollout that they were getting there in 2020. It's going to be easier to hit the fairways this time around. So those longer players are probably going to hit more fairways than they did before, right? Kind of shrinking the gap between the elite accuracy guys and the guys who are maybe a little bit more inaccurate. So this time around, I think maybe you see the bombers do a little bit better. And last time around, it's not like they didn't do well, right? Like top 6 finishers were all guys I'd consider to be a bomber. So this is a difficult major championship type of test, designed way back in 1923 by Willie Park Jr., but still holds up for the Tour Pros here. You've got the greens, like I said, are a defense on their own, but anytime you get like a 4 or 5 inch rough out there, that's just going to add another layer of difficulty. There is some water in play here. There's only 2 true water hazards, a few creeks that meander around the property, but they come into play on 8 different holes. So like I said, only 2 true hazards, but real long and lanky kind of hazards that affect a lot of the golf course. In fact, just about half of it. In terms of your bunkering, there are 91 bunkers, a ton of well-placed bunkers off the tee, and then bunkers around the green that might actually be easier to get up and down out of than some of the rough around the green. Unlike like an LA Country Club where you had a lot of shaved down areas around the green, around this golf course in Olympia Fields, it's a lot of that 4 or 5 inch rough. So players like a Colin Morikawa, a Victor Hovland that have shown an ability to get up and down out of deep rough are going to be at an advantage this week, right? It's just like Oak Hill. That same type of prototype that would have worked there is going to be the same kind of prototype that we're looking for this week. So we've gone through a lot of specifics. Let's go ahead and take a look at a hole-by-hole situation now and get an idea of what these players are going to be facing. The first 4 or 5 holes of this golf course aren't really going to look all that straightforward, but trust me, it's where almost all the birdies are going to come from. That should be evident with a par 5 off the bat. It is 624 yards, so don't expect to see a ton of people getting home in 2, but nonetheless, a birdie look for at least every player, right? You should be able to get back and play with your layup, if anything, even if you hit the ball offline off the tee, and depending on how far you can push it down there, you could have anything from like 130, 150 yards, down to someone like a 50, 60 yard pitch, right? Your elite level bombers are probably going to be able to get the ball a little bit further down there. I guess I set the wrong target there, but either way, your last shot is only going to be a little flip shot if you can accomplish that. So you might see 1, maybe 2 eagles over the week at hole number 1, especially if it plays firmer and faster like it did in 2022. But with the current weather forecast, it doesn't look like you're going to get that, right? So if it's going to play a little bit softer, maybe you have a slightly longer shot in here than what we're anticipating. And maybe it is closer to that 150 yard marker that I mentioned as a possibility before. If that's the case, you're still going to see a lot of birdies here, plenty of pars, right? If it's going to play a little bit longer, potentially even a bogey or 2, because 150 yards out is far from a guaranteed green regulation. And I mentioned just how penal this rough and some of the bunkers can be. It wouldn't be a lot of fun to play. Hole 2 is 469 yards. This is one of the quote-unquote easier golf holes here on property. A little left to right dog leg. The bunker to the right is going to get a lot of action. And if you have any sort of right to left movement on your driver, well, you're going to end up in this rough to the left. You can see the trees starting to come into play. Very much so a Parkland style setup. And once again, a ton of bunkering around the green, which acts as a good defense. Hole 3 is 463. This is, once again, an easy hole around the property. One of the more generous fairways, I would say, too. So it's about a mid-iron in. If you're going to make birdies, you're going to have to do it on this early stretch because as you'll see as we get to like hole 6 and 7, it deteriorates real quickly. First off, hole 4, 402 yards. I would say that this will be in the top 3 easiest holes all week. In fact, a lot of these shorter par 4s like you have here for holes 4 and 5 might play easier than the par 5s. It's that kind of test, especially when it's like a 600-yard par 5 like you have here. Hole 5 is 414. Once again, I would say one of the easier holes on property. If you hit a driver and force it up a little bit further here, it's going to be less than 100 yards in. So if you're an elite tier bomber, you have your driver down, you're confident in it. You're not worried about missing in the trees to the left or the right, which plenty of players are going to end up in. Well, this is a birdie look, right? But if you don't execute off the tee, well, then you're just hoping to make par at that point, right? You're blocked out by the trees. This little bunker in front's going to get a lot of action with people trying to shape shots and run it up onto the green. It's a difficult track if you're off position off the tee, which you'll see is going to be a huge factor this week. Hole 6 is your last little reprieve before this golf course gets really, really hard. It's 189 yards, and it's really not all that straightforward, right? It's still a mid to long iron. It's got plenty of protection about it, and it's awkwardly shaped too. It's definitely better for a right-handed player. It fits the dispersion pattern of a right-handed player a little bit better. So for somebody like Brian Harman, probably going to be a much harder hole than it will be for like every other player in the field. Hole 7 is 425 yards. This is also, honestly, I'd say is one of the easier holes. So I guess it's one more hole before you get the reprieve. But once again, the drive's not that straightforward, right? You got these bunkers in play, especially for a right-handed player. It fits their dispersion pattern off the tee. So this is actually a slightly harder hole for right-handed players than it would be for a left-handed player. But once again, if you can hit the short stuff, you're left with like 140, 120 yards in. You can definitely take advantage. But then you get hit over the head. Hole 8 is 290 yards, and it's a par 3. This is just like LA Country Club. In fact, this hole can actually play even longer than 209 yards. Some of the back pins can play over 300 yards. Good luck making a par. You're just hoping to make par and run to the next hole. But unfortunately, hole number 9, not easy either, right? 475 yards. The second shot plays slightly uphill. If you're blocked out by this tree, it's almost a for sure layup, leaving it about 40, 50 yards in front of the green. If you miss in this fairway bunker to the right, it's deep enough to keep you from going for the green in most cases, especially if you're up here in the front side of the bunker. It's a real difficult hole that they could use as hole 18 if they wanted to, but it's only hole number 9, and just wait for this backside. Hole 10 is 444. It's on the shorter end of the par 4s, but this tee shot is not one that's easy to squeeze in there. It's a little bit of a dogleg from right to left, so if you do have the draw shape, a little bit easier to hold the short stuff, but these fairway bunkers are just going to eat up a ton of shots. And unlike some of the bunkers that you've seen at like the Wyndham or even TPC Southwind last week, where they're not that deep, they're not that penal, the bunkers here a little bit more gnarly than what you get at those TPC setups. Hole 11 is 381, a shorter par 4, I'd say, but a lot of players are just going to lay up here. There's not as much an incentive to go out there, bomb it in front of the green. If you do so, you can leave a scoreable opportunity, but it does bring a little bit of risk into play, of course, right? You miss in the, rough to the right, it sets up hard angles into some of the greens. It's all about course management here, right? If you got a back right pin, missing in the rough over here to the left isn't all that bad, right? You'll have the green to work with. You might even be able to work something there close. If it's a back left pin, missing to the right's not that bad of an idea. So, the bombers might have a little bit more to think about here at hole number 11 than your average player, but unless you're hitting it like 310, 320 through the air, most people are just going to lay up here to the corner. Hole 12 is 388. It's a forced layup, so it plays a lot longer than 388, probably closer to like 410, 420 yards. And the uphill nature of the second shot also makes it a little bit trickier. Hole 13 is 167. This was the second easiest hole back in 2020, and you can see why. Huge green, one of the least awkwardly shaped greens on property, very traditional, right? Just an oval shaped out there. So it's got a little tabletop nature to it. If you miss the surface, you can be penalized, but it's one of the larger greens on the entire golf course and the shortest par 3 by far. Hole 14 is 453. This is really hard if you get offline. If you end up in the creek to the right, well, obviously that's an issue. But if you bail out to the left, you also have really difficult angles into the green. The trees will block you out. The rough is deep enough where a lot of people just lay up in front of it, right? Not even try risk going over this water hazard. And that's the other thing with this track, right? A lot of the hazards, a lot of the sand bunkers don't really look like they're that much in play, except when you miss the fairway, right? And you're trying to get back into position is when this little creek that's overhanging the fairway becomes especially important, right? You saw that at hole 17 last week at TPC Southwind. A lot of times that's where the hazards come in. 15 is 581. This is the one par 5 that I think you can reach into. The other one, you might see a few eagles from people chipping in. Well, here, you might actually have people hitting the surface in too. It's a hard dogleg from left to right, so you've got to set up a correct angle off the tee to get there. Only the elite level bombers are going to be able to set up that kind of angle, but if you can execute a really good drive, a really good 3-wood up there to the green, you could get home in 2. It's one of the smaller greens on property. Obviously, as a par 5, they want to add some protection there. You have a lot of bunkers around the green, which are difficult up and downs too. So it's not a guaranteed birdie, but the bombers can definitely set up an eagle look. 16 is 212. This is a difficult par 3. Water not really coming into play very much, or at least not for any sort of solidly hit golf shot. If you chunk it off the tee, I guess you could hit it in the water. But yeah, much more worried about the trees to the back left, which can actually cause a few problems, or even this water hazard to the right side of the green, where maybe if you hit a little bit too much of a slice, you end up over there. It's a difficult little par 3. 17, 455. This is, once again, a pretty difficult driving hole. You've got the creek to the right side, and a green that doesn't look like it's all that difficult from the overhead view, but a ton of slope at hole 17. And finally, hole 18, 501 yards, dogleg from left to right in an absolute brute, all right? If you bail out to the right, you're laying up because of this water hazard over there. If you miss to the left, well, you're probably doing the same, right? You're not going to go through the trees into the green from 200 yards. You're probably just going to lay up here in front of the water hazard and then just hope to get up and down for a par. It's a brute. I would doubt that you see more than like 20 birdies at hole 18 on the week. And for a finishing hole, it's pretty much exactly what you're hoping for, right? Par, probably the best score you're going to see. You're going to see plenty of bogeys at hole 18 and probably even a double bogey or two as well. Now that we've gone out there and seen the shots required, let's go through our key stats of the week that I'm using to identify our top plays in bets out there for the BMW. So first off, shots gained approach. That is almost always our number one key stat, but anytime you have a major championship type of test where misses are going to be penalized to the fullest while keeping yourself in play and going out there and setting up scoring looks is going to be how you separate yourself from the field. If you look at the leaderboard from 2020, almost everyone in the top 10 to 20 was up there in the top half of the field in approach play coming in. And of course, anytime you have 4 or 5 inch rough, you know, that's a half a shot or even 3/4 of a shot penalty every time that you miss a green. So for players that can keep themselves in play, that are high green and regulation percentage players, are going to be the type of players that you want to go out there and focus on for the BMW. So no surprise, it's the most predictive stat from week to week, regardless of the golf tournament out there in the PGA Tour. And like I said, no surprise there at number 1. Number 2, driving distance. This is incorporating the weather forecast that I foresee over the next 3 days. If it's going to be as damp as what they're calling for, well, driving distance is going to be even more important than it already was there in 2020. This is a relatively long par 70. Some of the better drivers of the golf ball are going to be able to take some of the bunkers out of play and, of course, go out there and score on some of the easier holes, right? Whether it be the par 5s, the 2, I don't want to call them drivable par 4s, but at least like pitch and putt par 4s. If you can get yourself in the short stuff, there's going to be a significant advantage that is already there at this golf course, regardless of conditions. But if it plays even longer, right, you're definitely going to want to look at some of those bombers. So Oak Hill, Winged Foot, we're going to get to comps here in a few minutes. Are 2 of the top 3 comp courses I'm looking at were extremely distance and swing speed based back there for those major championships. I think you see a similar kind of approach this time. And lastly, we've got shots gained putting. So I'm looking specifically at bent POA numbers. They are our bent POA surfaces out there this week, and also looking at sloped greens. Kind of like in Oak Hill, there are tiered surfaces out here. Even though they aren't massive at just over 5,000 square foot per green, they do have a high 3-putt rate, right? A lot of slopes, it's easy to miss something by 5-6 feet, and then those 5-6 foot comebackers sometimes have a hole or two of break to them. So, it's kind of double-edged there in terms of your first putt and then the putt coming back. So trying to take players that are, have experience on these sloped kind of greens, I think is something that you want to take a look at. And in terms of golf courses to compare it to, right, it's like the Masters type of greens, right? Out there at Kapalua, right, for the Tournament of Champions, where they have a ton of undulation on the greens. It's that kind of setup out there. So Oak Hill, Winged Foot, obviously, we're going to talk about those extensively here in just a minute, but also golf courses that had extremely difficult greens. And a lot of the older designs, like obviously 1923 design here with Billy Park Jr., tend to fit that description. A few other key stats: bogey avoidance, always important at a difficult golf course. Shots gained at major championships, another way to try and take a look at the players that might be used to the kind of conditions that we see at Olympia Fields. And lastly, I'm looking at par 4 scoring. Anytime you have a par 70 setup and we've got the 2 extra par 4s to work with, just something that I incorporate into my model to try and take advantage of that. But comp courses coming up next, a lot of correlation I think we can work with here. Let's go ahead and hop into that now. All right, our last segment here is going to be our comparison courses. So the types of tracks I think you can use to go out there, look for some leaderboard crossover. Perhaps if they've played well at these 3 tracks, I think they might be able to play well here this week, right? Because the courses, the tracks are similar for one reason or another, and just a little bit of extra data that you can use for going out there and putting together your models. So first off, we got Muirfield Village Golf Club, which I think is the best comp for this week, not only because it plays very similar in terms of a skill set, but more importantly, and probably most importantly here, we have a ton of data from this golf tournament, right? It's the Memorial every year. In fact, we had the work day there as an extra golf course, an extra event back there a few years ago. So we've got a lot of leaderboards to look at, a lot of different types of conditions that we can work with, unlike our last 2 comps that we'll go through. So while I think maybe from the visual perspective, the last 2 comps work a little bit better than what we have here with Muirfield Village, it's a difficult, longer track with really long Kentucky bluegrass rough, with sloped greens that are easy to 3-putt and really difficult to make birdies on, right? Memorial, one of the more difficult tracks that we get on the PGA Tour schedule every year, so obviously a lot of crossover there. The agronomy is almost identical between the 2 golf courses, and then, like I said, we have a ton of data to work with there too. So looking at the Memorial over the last 5-6 years, I think is going to be extremely helpful. It's a Jack Nicklaus design, so there are obviously a few changes, a few nuances to each golf course out there, but with a golf course that we haven't seen before, right? A lot of unknowns about Olympia Fields. I mean, we saw it there in 2020, but outside of that, back there to the early 2000s, we're going to try and find a lot of this comp course history to try and supplement what we already have. Next up, we've got Oak Hill Country Club, the home of the PGA Championship this year. So though we don't have a ton of data with Oak Hill, right? Not a lot of shots gained stuff. We at least have a lot of recent data, right? Or at least the data that we have, maybe it's not a lot, is recent, right? It's here from 2023. So I like the fact that it's got that long rough, similar agronomy, short, small sloped greens to work with that don't have a lot of depth to them. So a lot of crossover to be had there. The distance factor was evident out there at Oak Hill, right? The top 5, top 10 of the leaderboard was just bombers galore. And with the soft conditions here for Olympia Fields, I think we see a similar kind of effect. So a lot of crossover to be had from that golf tournament. And lastly, Winged Foot Golf Club, the home of the 2020 US Open, another track that had that real gnarly long, like 5-6 inch Kentucky bluegrass rough, hard to hit fairways, and greens that had a lot of slope to them too. So once again, just like Oak Hill, you saw the bombers go out there and just dismantle Winged Foot. If it gets to that same kind of bomber fest because of the rain here, well, you might see that same kind of leaderboard once again. So Muirfield, I think the best comp of the 3 just because we have the most history, but Oak Hill from this year and then Winged Foot back there. obviously major championships. They're going to give you an idea of what to expect at this major championship test. Alrighty guys, that is all I've got for the course breakdown this week. Hopefully you feel a little bit more prepared to go out there, get your lineups in, go out there, fire on a few bets. Before you hopping out of here, go ahead, show some love here on this video, smash that like button for me, and go ahead and comment down below what you think the winning score is going to be. I personally think it's going to play a little bit easier than what we saw the last time out with just -4 winning, so I'm going to take -9, right? I think it'll play marginally easier because of the rain that's coming through, making fairways, greens a little bit easier to come by, but I still think that because it's a good classical design, it's got that 5-6 inch rough, which will probably get even gnarlier with that rain. It still plays more difficult, right, than your average track on tour. So I'm gonna go with -9. I'd love to hear your thoughts down in the comments though, and hopefully, like I said, we can make this one of our better weeks out there. We've got DFS content that'll be dropping throughout the week, prop content too, of course, all of the behind the scenes stuff being posted over there on the Patreon page. If you want even more of it, subscribe to the channel so you can catch all of those videos when they're dropping. And of course, the Patreon page is there if you want to subscribe to get all of the content I have to offer, including DFS projection sheets, prop exposure, and all of my showdown and prop stuff over the weekend. Looking forward to it, guys. Should be an epic week on an even better golf course. Let's go out there and take advantage. Best of luck, and let's get this cash, fellas.